What up, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Estate Unlocked podcast. I am your host, Joseph Marone, and today we're going to be diving into one of the most highly anticipated topics in real estate investing. I'm talking about a game-changing strategy to make your money work harder for you rather than you working harder for your money. One of the most creative ways to earn profits in real estate without ever having to own a single property. Today, we're going to be breaking down transactional funding. Transactional funding is a short-term lending strategy designed to help real estate investors close deals quickly. It's more commonly used for double closings or covering earnest money deposits. This allows you to secure a property and flip it to an end buyer without tying up your own capital. As the demand for creative financing grows, transactional funding has become an essential tool for investors looking to scale their businesses and capitalize on lucrative opportunities. For those looking to start gaining higher returns, becoming a transactional lender is a game-changing opportunity. By providing short-term loans to investors, you can earn higher returns in a matter of days while playing a vital role in helping deals get across the finish line. Now, if transactional funding is a strategy you want to learn more about, then stay tuned because we're going to be giving you a step-by-step process on how you could start gaining higher returns today. Now you know how we do it on the Real Estate Unlocked podcast. If we're gonna do it, we gotta do it right. We can't just bring on anyone to speak about transactional funding. We gotta bring on Miss Transactional Funding. Today, our special guest on the podcast is Brenda VillaFranco. Brenda is a part-time transactional lender and a full-time hospital administrator. In just 1 year, she went from knowing nothing about real estate to becoming experienced in transactional funding, in which she closed over 15 deals this year alone. Brenda enjoys networking and sharing her journey with others, which has led her to be featured on 12 different podcasts. One of them being none other than Pace Morby's Get Creative podcast. Her story is a testament to the power of taking action and embracing new opportunities. Brenda joins us today to break down how transactional funding works and how it can help you close more deals with little to no money down, unlocking a whole new strategy to increase your real estate returns. So without further ado, I've been talking long enough. Everyone, if you will, please allow me to formally introduce to you Brenda VillaFranco. Brenda, how are you doing today?
Hey, what's up, Joseph? Wow, what an introduction. Like that is amazing. I gotta
Thank
give
you.
that was really awesome.
I appreciate you. I appreciate you. How's your Monday morning or afternoon going today?
Just continuously networking with people, meeting new people. And that's what really it's all about. I think people underestimate the power of networking. It's so key. And that's actually what's opened up doors for me in my transactional lending business.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't really understand the power of networking and communities. Like communities has been an absolute game changer for me. I talk about it all the time on the podcast. And I'm always like encouraging people like go join a community, go to a local meetup, and it's gonna change everything for you in your business.
So true. Honestly, I try to go to a networking event here in Houston at least twice a month just to kind of keep going at it and meeting new people, making sure that the doors of opportunities are continuously flowing. And I think that's important.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Brenda, well, welcome to the Real Estate Unlock podcast, a place where we bring value to new and intermediate investors by bringing on guests who are extremely knowledgeable, such as yourself, and covering real estate topics on a very basic entry level. I'm excited to dive into this topic because, in my opinion, private money is by far one of the most interesting and popular discussions in real estate. It's literally the backbone to every single deal. And that goes for any deal. not just real estate. So every single transaction involves an exchange of money of some sort. And most people, in my opinion, I feel like are stuck right now or can't scale their business because they don't understand how to leverage it or where to get access to it. So thank you, Brenda, for joining us today to shed some light on this very important topic.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. So, Brandon, let's just kind of dive right into this. So, can you start by explaining to our listeners in simple terms what exactly transactional funding is?
So, transactional funding is a term used for real estate investors. So, you won't really see transactional funding for someone that is purchasing a house and just wants to live in it, right? This is not going to be for that type of audience. This
Right.
audience is specifically for real estate investors that are trying to scale their business, are trying to actually purchase several properties at once or within a month. So, perfect example would be, you have a real estate investor or you have a wholesaler that is getting 10 properties a month locked up.
Right.
Your earnest money deposit is your good faith deposit. You're being serious about getting this property under contract. And so you're putting in, let's just say, an earnest money deposit of $5,000. Then if you do the math, that's $50,000 that would be tied up in a month.
Mm,
So what wholesalers will do is they'll reach out to someone like me that can come in, fund their $5,000, and then they'll be able to close properties and be able to scale their business without actually using any of their money. Once that
mm,
deal closes, they pay me out and then they actually get their assignment fee as well.
Great way to explain that. Why do you feel like transactional lending is so important in real estate?
I think it's more of the wanting to leverage, right? Do you want to go back in circles and just do the same type of revenue every year? I've actually met investors that are starting to use other people's money, so to
Mm,
speak, and they've spent the last 7 years just using their own funds. And they're like, why aren't we doing this? Like, I only get, this amount of cash. There's only so much, and you reach a certain ceiling, and so now they're starting to branch out and use other people's money.
yeah, it's incredible, right? Because I've met so many people that use their own capital and they don't even understand like nothing about private money lending. They don't know nothing about transactional funding. And when you tell them about that, they're like, they're kind of like they don't really believe it, right? Until you meet people like yourself that can actually fund the deal, get it across the finish line, and what they're paying only interest on. How do you structure your terms with your lending? Do you structure like a monthly payment only, or is it due up front? How do you structure that?
So for earnest money deposits, I usually have a $250 fee up front, just in
Okay.
case if the deal doesn't close or doesn't go through, then at least it could have been sitting in my high yield savings account and been making money for that entire month. So I look at it as like, okay, this is a way if in case it does fall through. And again, these are learning lessons that have been added throughout the year where I had a deal that didn't actually go through the finish line. And so they ended up canceling the contract. I received back my funds, but now I actually wasted money on my wire fees and my
Mm.
money sat there for close to a month and nothing happened. So as you learn and go, you'll start adding what makes you feel comfortable with what your term should be. But typically, it's based off relationship and it's based off how many deals do you think that this consistent borrower will come back to me and be able to fund some more.
Right, yeah, because you lost the wiring fee, which those can add up over time, right? And then
Yeah.
on top of that, your money was tied up where you could have been putting it to work on another deal, so you're actually losing money. That's an unfortunate situation.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. So with so many different avenues you can take in real estate, do you mind sharing like why you chose to focus primarily as a transactional lender as your pathway?
Yeah, actually, I started off doing private money lending initially. And
Okay.
so that was going great. But then I figured out in the summer, like, okay, my funds are currently tied up. What else could I possibly do that would bring me in another stream of income? And
Mm,
that's kind of where I started like, why don't I just start funding more of the transactional lending side and just see how it goes. So as I started networking, I started telling people what I do in more of the transactional lending space. And that actually helped me because then it kept me in their mind. And so even with my first investor that I ever did an EMD for, I met him and he called me 3 weeks later and he says, "Hey, I remembered from our previous conversation when we met in person that you actually fund EMDs. I have one coming up in a week. I, I would like for you to fund it." And so it was a $5,000 EMD, and we structured it in a way where I knew that he would always use me in the future. And so that's pretty much how it got structured. And that was probably my first and easiest EMD because it went so
Mm.
smooth, and they don't ever go as smooth as people think they do. But with this one, it was actually pretty smooth. Like, he called me, he gave me the title company, the purchase sale agreement. I looked over it, and then he connected me to the escrow officer. And once I spoke with the escrow officer, and I would like to say that if you're ever going to fund an EMD, please make sure that all communication is always through email, because then you keep an actual paper trail of what they actually said versus like having a conversation with them on the phone. Then they'll say, "Oh, I don't remember saying that," or, vice versa. So once communication with the escrow officer is up to par, then you make sure about your inspection period and the close of escrow. They have to line up with each other. Ideally, what a transactional lender will love to see is for the inspection period to go past the close of escrow. That's your ideal scenario. Half the time it does not happen. Usually it's always where we have to tell the wholesaler, "Can you actually change the date of this to bring it back to at least the date of close of escrow?" And so I ended up funding the 5,000, and he closed on the property within a week, and I ended up getting back $1,000 of return of profit.
That's awesome. Now, I know you we mentioned earlier about EMD being a good faith deposit, earnest money deposit, right? Now, can
Mhm.
you explain a little bit to the audience that maybe are unfamiliar with the term of what exactly a double close means?
Sure. So double closing is usually, again, for the audience of wholesalers. So typically, say you have a property that's $80,000 and a wholesaler gets the seller to, okay, you agree upon $80,000. Well, the wholesaler actually finds an end buyer and tells the end buyer, "Hey, I can sell you this property for $100,000." So they kind of want to hide the assignment fee from the actual seller. And so what they do is they'll bring in a transactional lender such as myself. I'll come in and fund the A to B contract, and then the end buyer will fund the B to C contract. But initially, the
Mm.
B to C contract needs to be funded first before I ever wire that money. And then from then, my profit will be the difference of that. And then the profit of the wholesaler goes to him on the assignment fee.
Yeah, that's so smart, right? Because there's sometimes when you get a wholesale deal where it just have so much meat on the bone, right? And you definitely like your assignment fee is so large, like sometimes it can actually kill the deal, right? The
Yeah.
seller sees that on the HUD statement and they're like, hold on, man. Brenda's making 100K on this deal. Like, what's going on? And it could actually kill your deal. So it's a great strategy, right? To close on it twice. That way there's no discrepancy. There's no they're not going to see that fee so large and actually want to cancel the contract. So it's definitely a smart strategy.
I've actually spoken to a wholesaler that said they found out how much they were going to make. I think their assignment fee was going to be like $50,000. And I was like, wow, that was a huge assignment fee. And that literally killed the deal for him. They ended up finding out, the seller did. So, yeah, double closing definitely can come in and save the day on that. So,
Yeah, and I've even heard of people like in buyers, right? Like wanting to cancel a contract just because they found out how much the wholesaler was making.
oh,
And I
wow.
never understood that concept, right? Because my thing is if you run your numbers, right, you underwrite a deal and it makes sense to you, then why are you worried about how much the wholesaler makes, right? As long as it makes sense to you, you shouldn't be so concerned about that. Sometimes wholesalers will even do a double close because they don't want the end buyer to see that. and then they're like, okay, cool, so they can actually close on the deal successfully and get paid. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. I think double closing would be the transactional lender's dream to just do double closing if they can.
right. And so this is something that actually it took me a long time when I first got into real estate. It took me a long time to wrap my head around this, but why would an investor choose to use a lender's services such as yourself and pay interest rather than just using their own capital to fund the deal?
It the word of the day would be leverage, right? I
Mm,
feel like and also with, like, mindset too. Like, if you have an
it is.
abundance mindset, you're not gonna care about paying for someone's service when you're not even having to use your money. You know
Mhm.
that you're still gonna make the amount that you're gonna make purchasing this property. So why not use other people's money? And I actually use other people's money myself sometimes when I'm not able to fund an EMD. Like I have a couple of people that whenever my funds are tied up, I'm like, hey, do you want to be partake in this EMD? And they're like, yeah, put me in on it. And then we just split half of the ROI with it. So I'm okay with using other people's money as well too.
Yeah, when I first got into real estate, I was buying and holding properties. And then, I would have people come up to me and say, hey, like I can fund your deal. And I'm like, well, why would I pay interest, right? When I have the capital already in my savings account, I could just fund my own deal. And, I like you said, I think it's a mindset thing because I didn't understand that my money was actually best put to work somewhere else than tying it up on an EMD or tying it up on my own deals when I could just pay Brenda, whatever percentage she charges, what, is probably between 8-12%, right? And I can actually make a higher return having my money in another vehicle in real estate. Right. So
Absolutely.
it's definitely a mindset thing. And I think people really need to understand that, once you get to a level where, you understand different streams of income in real estate, your money is best put in other vehicles rather than tying it up on your own deals.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's all requiring like a mindset shift. And
Yeah.
even me, like even in the past, I wanted to pay off my house quickly, right?
Mm.
But then in reality, I'm like, why? If it's being rented out, why do I want to do that? And so that was like a whole nother shift even on the mindset for me as well too.
Yeah. Now, so what is the difference, Brenda, between a transactional lender or per se like a private money lender and a hard money lender? What's the difference between those three?
So private money lender is someone that is funding for a real estate investor, but for a longer term per se, usually between 6 to 9 months, 6 months to a year, depending on what your preference is. You will always find deals that I feel like average, the ones that get thrown at me are usually about 6 months or so.
Okay.
Hard money lender will be someone where they fund between 75, 80% of the house that you're going to flip, but they're in first position. And so anyone new, first position will actually take in case a borrower ever defaulted, they would be the first ones to actually get the funds first. And then you would come in and you would actually collect the money on gap, right? You would fund for a gap, and so you will take second position, which is not the best position. It is riskier, which is why underwriting comes into play. Not Don't ever fund a deal if the underwriting doesn't pass.
Okay. Now, let's get into the heart of the question where everybody really wants to know, and it's how does someone get started with transactional funding? What are the first steps they should focus on?
First steps that they should focus on, if I were to start back all over again, would be to network, listen to people. Don't just like jump in to tell them what you're doing. I feel like a lot of people do that, but just genuinely have a conversation with people that you're networking with, and then later see how you can provide your service for them. I think listening is probably like key as well too, because I get people all the time that just send me messages and I'm not even part of that service. And so I think just networking, putting the word out there, being intentional with following up. I've gotten deals just from following up because I kept following up, and doesn't necessarily mean you'll close a deal someday, but hey, you put them you put yourself back into their mind again, like, hey, she keeps following up and she genuinely wants to build relationships. So like, why not do a deal with someone like her?
Yeah, I think like private money lenders and transactional lenders is kind of like a, like a secret thing that like they don't really talk about a whole lot, right? When you're at meetups, people don't advertise, "Hey, I'm a private money lender." Like why is that? Is like once you really get to know that person, it kind of comes out in the conversation. But you did
Mhm.
kind of mention that, like not to advertise it. Why is that?
For me, I think it's just more comfortable to hear first what they may need. And I
Mm,
don't want to go around telling every single person, like, hey, I'm a private money lender. And they're like, okay, like I use my own funds. Great. So I think it's like, for me, I think it's just like, I don't want to just jump in because that's not even my character. So I rather just like get to know someone like on a personal level. And then if they were to need my services in the future, then great. Then we can kind of go work towards that.
Yeah, I like that because when you're building relationships with people and you're building rapport and then you're just kind of casually having a conversation and you're like, "Hey Brenda, what do you need in your business or what are you looking for right now?" And then someone brings up the fact like, "Hey, I got this deal. Actually, I'm looking for funding right now." And then it just comes out, right? "Hey, you know what? I could fund that deal." They're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I didn't even know you were a lender. Like, that's amazing. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
let's get it, let me show you the deal and see if it makes sense, right?" So, yeah,
Right.
I definitely see where you're coming from with that. You definitely don't want to be going around telling everybody that you're a lender, right? Because then you might even get a bunch of people hitting you up and bringing deals that are not even worth looking at.
Yeah, no, I actually get quite a few DMs like on Instagram, and people are like, "Hey, I need a deal funded." I'm like, "Do you have a pitch deck? Do you want to get on
Right.
the call?" I mean, it doesn't work that way. So that's actually really funny that you mentioned that.
Yeah. So, what type of investors come to you typically for funding? Are you primarily working with wholesalers, like fix and flippers, buy and hold investors?
So typically, my ideal audience would be a wholesaler, but I
Okay.
have funded EMDs for in buyers, fix and flippers, actually quite a few. And so that's not the ideal. And I'm going to tell you why it's not the ideal. Only because an in buyer is way riskier than a wholesaler.
Right.
Because with an in buyer, you can almost think of an EMD from an in buyer as like a short term private money lending deal in a sense. Either you have to minimize the risk by, again, having inspection period be greater than the close of escrow, which usually never happens. And so for the in buyer, once you submit that EMD for the in buyer, your money goes hard and that's it. And so
Mm.
the only way to protect yourself is to either promissory note, which is basically saying, "Hey, I promise to pay you back," and then actually getting like a deed of trust and cross collateral on an asset that they have. And that would be like the way where you would protect yourself for an in buyer.
Right, and especially for an end buyer that's holding on to the property, their cash flow has to be a significant amount where they can actually pay you back in the first place, right? Because most people that are coming to you, like you said, their wholesalers are their fix and flippers, and they're going to make a killing on their deal more than likely, and it's way easier for them to pay you back versus someone that's holding on to a property long term, looking to pay back that in 30 days, right? So definitely
Exactly.
makes sense.
And usually for an in buyer, their as it exit strategy is for the private money lender that's going to be providing funds for the next 6 months to fix and flip the property is going to have my EMD and my return of investment at the close of escrow.
Okay. And now you kind of you brought up the fact about a pitch deck, right? And so I was going to ask you, how are you qualifying these investors that come to you for funding? Are you running credit checks? Are you looking at their income? Are you taking DNA samples? Is it just based, on experience in the actual deal itself?
For EMD, it's just on experience and the actual deal itself. Being able to look at a purchase sale agreement and being able to see the inspection period and the close of escrow versus like a private money lending deal, you actually have to do underwriting. You actually have to
Mm,
vet the borrower and make sure that a background check is done, making sure like if they have any experience, they have to show proof of that experience. and make sure that not just one person underwrites it, but at least a few people underwrite it just to make sure that it's a good deal overall. But I think for me, with private money lending, I rather fund for someone that I actually already know and I know has a solid record versus just like a random stranger.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, when an investor comes to you with the EMD opportunity, are you not underwriting the deal, or is that only for private money lending, or how does that work?
That's correct. For earnest money deposit, EMD, you don't have to underwrite. So that's the cool thing about it. Basically, for EMD, the risk of you losing money, which is still a risk, would be if the deal falls apart or if you didn't actually have great communication and make sure that all your questions were covered with the escrow officer prior to you wiring your funds.
Okay, amazing. Now, can you walk us through a typical transactional funding process step by step from finding the deal to closing both sides of the transaction?
Yeah, so I can actually walk you through one that I have that just closed today, which was my first double close.
Oh,
Um,
congratulations. That's
Thank you so
amazing.
much. Yeah, so basically, I met this investor back in the owners club. So, and we developed a relationship over time. We followed each other on social media. And what was cool about it is he brought me on to his first podcast. I was his first guest. And then from that first podcast, like we actually continued building a relationship and we kept in touch. And so then he messaged me one day and says, "Hey, I have a double close from a guy that I met." And so I was like, "Oh, cool. Like we should totally fund it and, we'll split profits or whatever." Well, what turned out was that it was actually a probate. And so it was going to take a little bit longer. When
Okay.
he ended up following up, he didn't actually like need him anymore. So that deal fell through. Well, then a
Mm,
couple of weeks ago, Tim, the same guy that, came to me about the double close, he says, "Hey, I'm actually going to double close. So like now I'll need your service." And I was like, "Nice." And he was like, "Yeah, so we're thinking of closing like December 10th, unless there's like some other issues." And so we actually ended up wiring on Friday, but because the cutoff time was 3 p.m., we actually got the wire back today. So that's why it was like an official close now on the double close. But basically, Tim brought, so we have, Tim as a wholesaler. He put a
mhm.
contract with the seller on a property. And so he was going to make his assignment fee, but he didn't want the seller to know how much he was going to make. And so he brought in his A to B contract and then he brought in his B to C contract on the end buyer. So if you take it step by step, it's him just submitting those two contracts. And then now I get introduced by him to the escrow officer and the title company. And then from then on, we communicate back and forth in email. So it's a total of like several emails that go back and forth just to make sure like everything is intact. Like, hey, is this A to B contract completed? Is this B to contract? Okay, cool. Did the B to C actually wire funds first? Because I can't wire funds until that B to C wires funds first, because technically that's how I'm getting paid out again. Right. And so once that is completed, all of this is between the escrow officer and Tim and I, right? And so finally, the wire goes through. She says, the escrow officer says, "Okay, wire sent. Here's proof." And then now they'll send their wire to us, and then we'll receive our return of investment. So it's not a lot of work per se. Like it's not like you're outside building a foundational house or like new
Right.
ground construction, but it is a lot of communication back and forth. And just all of that gets done within a couple of hours.
I love that story, right? Because it shows the power of networking in the community, right? Shout out to Tim. Shout out to Owners Club that made all this possible for you guys to meet and do a
Yeah.
deal together. And when you were talking about, wiring the funds, I want to bring mention that because I it's really important that you guys never wire directly to the person itself, right? You want to wire directly to escrow. That's how
Mhm.
you're protecting yourself, right? Because I've heard so many horror stories where people deal with somebody and they're like, "Hey, I need this funding within 24 hours. Can you just wire it directly to me?" That's a no-no. That's a red flag, right?
Right, right. But you know what's so funny that you mentioned that is because I've met other different groups outside of like Pace's community, and they
Hmm.
actually wire within their LLC. And so
Oh,
to me, that was new. So I was like, huh. And so I one of the guys that I met, their hard money lender doesn't allow a second position. And so it has to show like their funds within their LLC account. And so they've done
okay.
deals that way. So there are different, and again, like I think it depends on the relationship and the trust, right? Making sure that your paperwork is done correctly and making sure that your funds are still secured within the paperwork. But it's good to know, like, the more and more I network, the more and more I learn new things about how certain deals are done. They're not all going to be done the same, or at least that's the interpretation that I've had as well with other communities. But in similarities, you still have to have the same paperwork, such as promissory note, deed of trust, as well too recorded. So, in that sense,
Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of the relationship. How do you feel? How comfortable do you feel? Um, and just making sure that your funds are secure. Most importantly,
Yeah, I think it's really based off your own risk tolerance and, like you said, kind of how well you know that person. Because I know Pace, he teaches us like, hey, don't even trust your own mom with your money, right?
yeah, he says
But
don't even
obviously,
trust your
if I
grandma.
need to wire mom money, I'm gonna wire mom money. But yeah, I hit the point he's really trying to hone in on is like, hey, just because they're your friend, just because you guys are in a good relationship, doesn't mean that that person won't screw you over. So the way you 100% protect yourself is sending it directly to escrow. But I know there are some people that they go around it and, they send direct, but just know that your money's at risk when you do that because there's really no way to protect yourself, right? If you're wiring directly to an LLC, how do you protect yourself?
Well, you still have the promissory note and the deed of trust as well too. Yeah, so I mean, you still, if you have cross collateral, even better, because then you can actually take that asset.
Okay. Now, you did bring up promissory note, and I want to ask now, what type of contracts or paperwork is involved with transactional lending, and how are both sides protected in the transaction?
So it's just for EMDs, it's just a JV agreement, just stating like, hey, this is what I'm funding for this property. This is going to be my return, and then they both sign, and then we have that as the agreement. But the rest again goes back to title and communication.
Okay, so is it just a JV agreement? There's no promissory note or anything?
Mm-mm. There's no promissory note. Yeah, that's only for private money lending.
Okay, perfect. Now, what are the usual terms or timeframes for like these type of deals? So you mentioned there are 30 days, right? Now, and sometimes they go to 45 days. Is that the max you've seen them?
Yeah, so people have different terms. The max I've seen is 45 days, but some transactional lenders have terms. So, like, say, for instance, your usual transaction is usually 14 days to 30 days. And then if it were to go above 30 days, I know lenders that actually add an extra percentage to 30 days up to the 45 days because in
Mm,
their eyes they're like, well, I can easily have put this on another 30-day deal, and now I'm still sitting here with my money still sitting there in escrow until the deal closes. So
okay.
45 days is probably the highest I've seen so far, but doesn't typically go. It really does close by the 30th day or so.
And at what percent are most transactional lenders, charging?
The average is 40%.
40%. That's a hefty return. It's a great
Yeah.
return actually, I know they teach that in Gator lending and all that. Because I've heard people do like 10 to 12, but that's more on the private money side, right? So when it comes to
That's correct.
transactional lending, it's a 30 to 40%. Is that what it is?
Some people do 30, the average is 40. And then again, some people that have a repeated borrower may lower it down to 30, 25, just depending again based off relationship.
Okay. Now, I know it's going to vary and it's a pretty much a vague question, but what kind of returns can an investor realistically make in the first year if they follow the blueprint and only do transactional lending?
30, if they even did it part-time. Like, I only do it part-time because I have a full-time job, but they can
Right.
easily between 30 and 50K.
Okay.
Mhm.
That's a good side hustle, right? And,
Yeah.
we kinda talked a little bit about that, right? And I was telling you it's smart because you do have a W-2 and you're a high W-2 earner, and it does require a lot of your time where you don't have to focus entirely on, buying properties and turning them into rentals, dealing with property managers. You could just lend your money out and have your money working for you while you're at the job, right? So it's definitely a great thing to have in your arsenal.
Yeah, for me, it works out perfectly because I don't have that time. Like, I do have, 12-hour shifts. I'm usually not able to talk on the phone. Like, my job is actually pretty demanding. And so I'm not able to actually be on calls while I'm working or anything like that. Because at work, I am on a lot of calls, so to speak.
Awesome. Now, can you be a transactional lender if you don't have a whole lot of money?
Yes. Yes, you can. And by the way, I would say it's just to collaborate with other people. So, say for instance, someone comes to me and says, Brenda, I don't have any money, but I want to do my first EMD transaction. So then I would say, okay, so if you bring me a deal, then I will split 50-50 with you. And so there's really no excuse to make money in the transactional lending space or even the private money lending space. It's just a matter of like building good relationships and making sure that you can actually bring deals to someone. If you can solve that problem for a transactional lender by bringing them deals, then you will be making money yourself.
Perfect. Now, let's say someone has money to lend. They follow all the advice here, but they don't know where to lend or who to lend to. How do they market themselves and find potential borrowers?
So you can do various. So my main thing is in-person meetups. That's been my biggest. Also, the second thing that you can do is you can go to Facebook groups and you can look up wholesaling groups by state, or you can do fix and flippers by state, and also just kind of see the comments and kind of pick out some people that you want to actually message and say, hey, I see that you posted about this property. If you're ever interested, just kind of start a conversation, but not jump into the, hey, I'm a transactional lender. Like, I feel like that always turns people off. It's just like, again, like when you're meeting in person, right, for the first time, like you're not going to jump to them and say, hey, I'm a transactional lender. Like, I have
Right.
money. Right. And so it's the same way too online. Like, you just get to know someone and you're going back and forth. And so once you kind of start building and having them get warm, and then you can actually have the services for you and they'll keep you in mind for that. So you can either do a lot of outreach on Facebook groups, or you can do actually some like warm leads. So any one of your friends, so say for instance you're my warm lead, Joseph, because I know you, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
both in the same community, and so if you ever needed any EMD funding or any double closing, you can come to me and I'm able to fund that for you. So that's another way of doing it. And then the third way is just through social media, is telling people out there, what are you doing? What do you plan on doing? And documenting that journey.
Yeah, and it goes both ways, right? Like, so even for myself, like I'm active with wholesaling, I'm active with buying properties, and I'm always posting content and showing that to the world because
Mhm.
then I get people like yourself reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, I saw you just did that last deal. Do you need any funding?" I literally will get people in my inbox from just sharing my content of what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. So it
Yeah.
goes both ways, right?
Yeah. And I actually saw on someone's story 2 days ago, they were thinking of either doing a double closing or a novation deal, but they're kind of iffy on which one's going to work the best. I saw that on their story. I sent them a message saying, like, hey, I saw you were going back and forth. If you ever need a double closing, like, I fund those as well. And he says, I didn't know that. So there you go. That was like a nice introduction to, if you ever need me, here you go.
That's awesome. Now, one thing I do like to hone in on this podcast is I like to be fully transparent. I don't like to always paint out that everything's rainbows and unicorns, right? So let's talk about the risks involved with lending. Have you ever had a deal go sideways? Or what's the riskiest deal you've ever funded and how close did it come to falling apart?
So riskiest deal so far for EMD was an in buyer, right? So with that in buyer, we did have, the good thing is we got paperwork to secure it. So the deal, the moment we funded, the money went hard, right? And so we didn't. So one of the lessons I did learn early on was back again to the inspection period and the close of escrow, right? We have to make sure that those two match or aligned, or if it doesn't, then my money goes hard. And in this case, it did go hard. And so thankfully, we have paperwork for cross collateral on an asset from the borrower in case they didn't pay us back. So could have gone bad if it didn't, because in reality, that borrower wasn't able to close on the property because she wasn't able to bring in her PML for the gap funding. And typically that
Mm,
was the exit strategy. So thankfully we had cross collateral. But again, if you go back to the paperwork and if you don't have those things in structure, then you can lose money. That is true. Like, so just know that with the transactional lending, with private money lending, if you do not underwrite correctly, if you do not put structure on your deals, so, and by structure I mean, if you know that, let's just say for an example, a borrower is needing a second position to fund for his gap funding for his fix and flip. But if you don't put the structure of having draws on each phase, and just giving your funds all to him all at once, then that increases the risk of him, either A, not finishing the job, or B, something can happen where he uses his money on another project, or, what I mean? So you always want to minimize that risk.
right.
You want to draws on that. You want to make sure that the underwriting passes before you even fund. You want to make sure that the borrower's LLC is intact and in good standing. You want to make sure that you vet the title company, make sure they actually have good Google reviews, greater than a year or two. You want to make sure that, how is their communication? How is this borrower's communication? Are they going to be the type to only text you once a month, or keep it? Are you going to structure it where you want photos every week or two to know how the process of your flip is coming? So I think just putting those structures, how you feel is, everyone's different. Some people are okay not having pictures, right? But it depends at the end, like your risk tolerance. But just know, like in the lending space, there is always a risk to lose money.
I love the fact that you said, you learned a lesson from it, right? Because I think no matter how much knowledge you have in real estate, how much experience you have, I think mistakes are things go sideways in real estate no matter what, right? And it really depends on your risk tolerance, but the fact is, if you do make a mistake or something happens, the key there is really to learn from that so you don't do it again, right?
Right.
And so I love that you mentioned you learn from that. A little tip I want to give you guys now. Sometimes when you get like, when they send the EMD instructions, right, the wiring instructions, and you'll go off that based off the email. Now, what I physically do is, because I've seen horror stories where people actually Photoshop these wire instructions. I
Yes.
will actually call the title company myself, and I will verify, like, I will Google it. Like, I won't go off the
Yes.
phone number that's on that sheet. I will actually Google that title company, and I'll just ask them, "Hey, is this accurate? This wire instructions accurate?" And, because I've seen people Photoshop it. People do some crazy stuff to
Crazy.
steal
Yeah.
people's money. So that's a little tip for you guys. Make sure whenever you guys get those wiring instructions, actually Google the business and call them directly. Don't go off the phone number, because you may be calling somebody else that's ready to set you up, right?
Yes, I agree. That's so good that you brought that up, because I do the same thing. So yeah, if you get wire instructions via email, make sure that you actually don't call the number on the wiring instructions, but instead you take the time to Google the title company and call that main number to make sure that the wire instructions is legit.
Absolutely. Now, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see other lenders make when they start lending money? And how can our listeners avoid these common pitfalls?
High risk returns, I think, is it's like the one that like blinds them completely, just like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get a 30% return, a 40% return. I've seen some crazy, like people DM me on like a return, I'm just like, no, pass. Like, and
Yeah.
so that's one crazy returns. You get blinded on that. And then I see a lot of new real estate investors like that want to get into lending space and they want to have a deal so bad, so bad. And so usually if I get a chance to talk to them, I always tell them, look, never rush it, build relationships, and the deals will always come. People will always fix and flip. People will always need a loan. Like it doesn't end. Like, so just don't worry that you're going to miss out on a certain loan or you're going to miss out on a certain deal. Like it'll come back. And there's one literally like every day. So don't even sweat the small stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think you touched a good point there because some people they get impatient, right? They understand the proper due diligence, they understand all the risks involved, and they know how to avoid them. But they get so desperate to get a deal done, or they see those higher returns, and they completely forget about everything that they learn, and they take a risk action, right? And so that's definitely a common way to lose your money. So definitely make sure whatever you learn on the proper way to protect yourself, just stick to that. When you see somebody saying, "Hey, I need an AMD in 24 hours," like what is your minimum time frame for you to send, to wire the money?
The same day. It can be the same day as long as I'm able to see that purchase sale agreement and making sure that the inspection period is so like say I've had deals that have fallen through only because they say, "Oh, I need EMD today. Today's the day." Right? And in a borrower's eyes, you want them to be considerate of your money, but unfortunately, most of them are not. And
Mhm.
so they want something funded that day and they don't care about your funds, and so the only person responsible is myself. And so I have to like verify and make sure that the inspection period can at least go. I'm like, okay, so for instance, perfect example was I had an EMD about a month and a half ago and they needed funding that day. This was at 11 o'clock in the morning when I got on the call with them. And they said, okay, I need EMD within like the next by 2 p.m. And so I said, okay, send me all the information. And it turns out that the inspection period ended that same day at 5 p.m. So I said, hey, I can't fund your EMD because you need an extension on your inspection period and close of escrow. And he was like, oh, like, we're working on it, yada, yada. And I didn't fund it that day because I told him, like, hey, there's no point in me wiring something at 2 p.m. when I have to cancel at before 5 p.m. Doesn't make any
Mm.
sense. And so finally got it extended 2 more days. But then by the time the 2 more days came, it was technically Monday by 5 p.m. So here
Wow.
we are again in the same situation. And so you can tell that the borrower was frustrated. And I said, it's not a matter of that I can't fund this, is that my funds will not be secured. And
Mm.
so once I was able to explain that to him, I think and the cool thing about it is that he called back later on that week and apologized for allowing me to be in a position to making me feel rushed. When in
Yeah.
reality, he knew that he should have probably done better and had a better inspection date to be
I
extended
mean,
at least a week.
it's good he reached back out to you and apologized, right? Because you want to do right by your lenders, right? And I always say this: if I'm ever going to borrow money from a lender that's trusting me with their funds, I will do everything in my power to make sure that they get paid back, whether I have to borrow against my own properties,
Exactly.
whatever. Like if I know I can't pay them back, I will figure out how to pay them back because one, they took the risk on lending to me, and I never want them to ever feel like they're going to lose their money on risking on me. And
Mhm.
two, my name is everything in this industry, right? Once you do a bad deal like that or you don't pay a lender back, your name is tarnished, right? And then you kind of have like this, red flag written all over you. So anytime you want to borrow money, people already know, like, hey, you know what? That guy's no good, man. He don't pay anybody back.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So I'm sure you get a ton of people reaching out to you all the time, asking for money or asking you to fund their deals. And the truth is, most people don't understand how to ask properly, right? So, as an investor who's looking for funding, what's the best way to present an opportunity to you? And give us an example of like a good approach versus a bad approach.
So a good approach would be someone that the more information you give on what you want funded, the better. because then I'm able to do my due diligence. I'm able to underwrite it. I'm able to see who you are, what you do, what experience you have. And then I'm able to see the property that you want funded. And then I'm able to do my own due diligence and go and search the property and be able to do comps, be able to underwrite it. And then after that, I'm like, okay, is this an amount that I'm willing to risk per se? Or is this something that, I feel comfortable with doing? That also gives me like other options with, do I want to JV my funds with someone else as well too, and just go half and half? Because it's not really always about the return of investment. I feel like it's more fun when you collaborate with other people and are able to be part of a deal. I think that makes it way more fun. This how to not approach me or
Mhm.
anyone that has funds is to send me a message and say, hey, I have a deal that needs to be funded, 80K. I get this all the time, and I'm just like the worst approach ever. Hi, what's your name? Like, I don't know what you do. Never approach someone like that. I think just again, just take your time, get to know that person. Even if you know that I have funds, like keep me in mind for future and just start building on that relationship and maybe send that information to someone that already has funded for you. That's usually how
Mhm.
I will like that approach.
There you go, guys. Take notes. Stop being lazy. It's not up to Brenda to do the work for you or any lender for that matter. Like, it's our job to put everything in place where you have to do minimal research, right? I want to provide as much information to you so you know everything about the deal and you feel comfortable lending on the deal. But yeah,
That's
just approaching you and saying, "Hey, I need 80K on this deal. I need it by tomorrow or I need it by today." Like, that's the worst approach ever. Never do that.
yeah. No, definitely. And you'd be surprised how many times I get that.
Oh, I believe you. Now,
Yeah.
have you ever witnessed someone use transactional funding to make 50K, 7K, even 100K in one day? Or what's the wildest deal you've ever seen?
Well, the wildest probably someone made about 10 to 15K in like a Morby method.
Okay.
Yeah, so definitely there's room for money to be made. They've made that quite a few times actually. So I haven't done a Morby method, and I'm a little bit familiar with the concept, but until I actually go through one, I think I'll understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, so I'm glad you actually brought that up because I actually brought on Ingrid Hernandez onto the podcast, and she's one of the first people ever to do the Morby method inside of Sub 2, and we
Nice.
touched everything on that topic, and it's a very complicated topic to understand. So we went over all the basics on it, and so if you guys want to watch that, we'll make sure that we link it onto this podcast. Now, how can you leverage transactional funding to scale your real estate business?
I think leveraging your relationships. I
I
think being
love that.
able to always provide the value for your borrowers, and always being in touch with them, following up with them. I think just being able to provide that and always be within their circle. I think that's how you can make the most money instead of having to like always try to find new people, new borrowers, to new wholesalers or new fix and flippers and buyers. I think just keeping the ones that you have. You have a good handful that you've done transactions with, just keep those. They're not going
Yep.
to stop. Like they have their own business, right? And the more you help them, the more they'll come to you. So,
Absolutely. And being quick too, right? Because I see a lot of like transactional lenders, like they fund them like quick. Like you really have to be quick in this business because sometimes people are moving, right? And
yeah.
if it takes forever to get a response from Brenda, I'm just going to go to my other lender and then they're going to fund it and they're the one that's going to actually make the money. So,
You know what's funny that you said that now is that you're actually right. You have to be very like swift about it as well too,
mhm.
right? Like you have to move in a way. I had someone reach out to me and I saw the message within 5 minutes. I reached out to them and they said, "Oh wow, that was quick. I'll need you for funding," because he reached out to like two other people and they took like more than an hour to respond. So
Wow.
definitely, yeah. So I got a deal from that.
Perfect. Now, I always like to give somebody, a call to action that made it this far in the episode. What are three action steps a beginner can take today to start using transactional funding and start making money in real estate?
Number one, educate yourself, know the ins and out of it, because the more you educate yourself, the more confident you'll be. So when you approach people to provide your services, then you're able to say, "Hey, I can fund this." And then if they have questions, you're able to actually provide the answers and not be and if you do, that's okay too, right? You can always
Mhm.
say, "Hey, I'm not sure, but my funding partner does know the answer to that." So regardless, so I think it's just a matter of like, you don't have to feel like you know everything. We don't all know everything.
Right.
And every transaction, I learn something new and different. So it goes
Same.
back to, yeah, it goes back to like the experience. The second thing is just start taking action, start reaching out to people, start even just looking at Facebook groups, start doing your searches, do wholesale California, do wholesale
Mhm.
Florida, and just see what you get and kind of start looking at, oh, maybe I can message this person and maybe I can message this person. Just start taking action and you'll see eventually you have no choice but to compound.
Right. Absolutely. And did you have a third one?
The third one would be start attending more real estate in-person meetups.
Love it. That is definitely. And then, I do a lot of, quite a few wholesale deals. I'm definitely going to bring some opportunities your way because a lot of time people are looking for EMD funding, and I'll make sure I refer them to you to bring some more business your way.
I appreciate
Now, are
that.
there any resources, any books, podcasts, or tools you'd recommend to learn more about transactional lending?
Absolutely. Ryan Troop has a school community.
Mm.
You can actually join his community and it's free. He has a paid one as well too, but you can join the free one and he has like enough value in there for you. Or he has a YouTube channel too as well.
Yeah, he was actually one of the ones I was talking about that funds them very quickly. I see him like he funds within minutes. It's amazing. I guess he has a system in place where he can, respond very quickly.
Yeah.
And again, that's the key right there, right?
So I'm actually part of his school community.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so if I get funds tied up that I can't fund myself, I refer it to that.
Okay. Now, lastly, what's a question you wish more investors would ask about transactional funding, but they don't?
How to do it correctly? Like how, like this actual, like how to do, I feel like wholesalers, they love shortcuts. And I wish wholesalers would actually take the time to like really know the ins and out of it. Like I had a wholesaler reach out to me. He didn't know what a double close was, but he wanted to start doing that. And so I gave him like a few resources on what double close is. I even sent him like a couple of videos from YouTube. And so he actually took the time versus like most, if they don't know, they act like they know, but they don't really know. And so it makes the whole process like even more of a headache. So,
Yeah, and that's the whole purpose of these podcasts, right? I want to educate the audience because I feel like a lot of people they're either afraid to ask the questions because they don't want to look dumb, and there's no such thing as a stupid question because you should be asking questions, or they just don't take the time to really educate themselves. So, a lot of people don't like to read books. They don't like to do stuff like that. So, to have a visual or watch a podcast where you can learn from, I think that's really key right there. So, that's why I like to go over all these questions and have people like yourself break down, double closings. What is that? What is EMD? And how to properly protect yourself on a transaction. So, definitely good point there. Awesome. Well, Brenda, I am so impressed by you and what you've been able to accomplish. Not only are you working in a great career where people rely on you for their health, but you're constantly getting nominated for awards such as the Good Samaritan Award and Employee of the Quarter. What? That's amazing. So it says a lot about your character and the type of person you really are.
I,
A type of person that puts people's needs before her own. Not to mention, you've identified the time that you have in your day, right? And you figured out a way to make even more money in real estate. You're an all-star, and I'm honored to be a friend of yours and be involved in the same community as you. So thank you.
thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the kind words. And, I look forward to us even like collaborating in the future.
Definitely. We will definitely be collaborating. So now, how can our audience connect with you, Brenda, or learn more about your expertise in this area?
Follow me on Instagram at Brenda Builds Wealth. That's usually where I'm kind of starting to kind of get out there and filming more of my journey. It's been social media and I'm not the social media person. But slowly and slowly, I've learned that the more and more I make a post about what I'm doing, the more people actually learn about it. So it's I've taken a different perspective on if I can help one person, then I at least can help one person get started.
Absolutely. Even if it's just picking up your iPhone or picking up your phone and
Yes.
just recording yourself, document everything and put the content out.
No, absolutely.
Awesome. Now, if you guys are finding value from this podcast, don't forget to show your boys some love. If you like what we're bringing you, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us continue providing value to others by reaching a broader audience. We're out here to serve, learn together, and help as many people as possible. Make sure to also smash that like button and drop a comment down below if you plan to start lending yourself or if you're actually looking for funding on your next deal. Appreciate all the continued support. And guys, stay tuned because we're pumping these episodes out every 2 weeks. I got some awesome topics and guests coming up next in 2025 that will change the entire way you do business. You definitely don't want to miss out. Best believe I'm going to keep bringing you that fire. Peace. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.